This is The Bandwagon, a podcast about baseball and how well I remember everything that went down in the last 48 hours before the trade deadline. Actually, we're going to start by going back further than that. But first, I am Hannah Keyser, a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports, joined as always by Zach Crizer, also a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports. Zach, you look appropriately disheveled for coming immediately after the trade deadline and all of the frantic writing.
Yeah, I finished writing at 7:18. It is, I think, about 25 minutes later, and we're recording, which, behind the scenes of podcast making, that requires some shuffling in my apartment. So, a little disheveled, but mostly ready to talk about baseball trades and the very few people left on the New York Mets.
I do not feel ready to talk about baseball trades. Just full disclosure, I am concerned about how well I remember all of the trades that went down. However, we do have notes. I'm going rogue already. I'm going to rejigger the order in which we were going to talk about these things because I feel like the Angels keeping Ohtani, both news and then subsequent acquisitions that validated that news or proved that news, that feels forever ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
it was
all.
Roughly forever ago.
Feels forever ago. That's all I was going to say. Feels like a really long time ago. And not enough teams, this is true every year, not enough teams act quickly, like well in advance of the deadline. If you need to be better, it is better to be better sooner for more baseball games. Like, I understand that the leverage of making deals is such that it's easier to get them done closer to the deadline. But I really applaud the Angels, which we will get to, for making their intentions known. They, like the Tom Verducci of Sports Illustrated, reported that they were not going to trade Shohei Ohtani, which came after like weeks of them, if not explicitly saying that, certainly giving no indication that they intended to trade him. But first, Tom Verducci reported this, and then like that same night, a few hours later, they traded for the White Sox pitcher Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez. So you wrote about this, and I was going over all of the things that you wrote because you took a wider lens to this. I only wrote about the Yankees, and you pointed out that if they were going to act so quickly, perhaps they should have gone after a better pitcher.
I don't actually know if they could have gotten a better pitcher for the prospects they had. They used two of their three best prospects by most people's estimation to get Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez. So I can't really quibble that much because I don't know what they could have gotten that was much better. Right. Although I don't think the prospect package for Jordan Montgomery, who the Rangers traded for from the St. Louis Cardinals, I don't think that package was significantly different than the Giolito Reynaldo Lopez package, and I think Jordan Montgomery might be significantly more reliable down the stretch for the Angels. So, he won't be playing for the Angels, but I think he might have been more reliable if he did. So, I have small quibbles, but I think overall they did a pretty nice job collecting a bunch of things they needed really fast before the market really got frothy and before we found out just how few hitters would be available. I will say that in the Angels' favor. They nabbed CJ Cron and Randall Grichuk early, and then the Cubs were like, just kidding, we are not selling. So now the best hitter on the market is we're not even sure. So the Angels did a nice job to get two useful hitters before everyone else realized that there weren't many left.
Yes. Top line news out of this deadline. The Angels are keeping Ohtani. The Mets have no one left. Their only good pitching was traded. Like, the only interesting trades were pitching, and the AL West race is really going to be even more interesting than it was already. Okay, how do we want to get into that? Do you want to talk about the Mets selling, and then that will naturally take us to the AL West race?
I think let's talk about the procession of the Mets. So after the Mets traded David Robertson, sorry, David Robertson, you're being relegated to like a grace note in this.
He's there's a phrase about this. He's the canary in the coal mine, kinda.
Kind of.
He's the thing. He's the thing that made people go like, oh, they're going to sell.
So David Robertson got traded to the Marlins. And then the next day, Max Scherzer started and was pretty good and said that he didn't know what direction the team was going in and needed to talk to the front office. Pretty much before we got through that news cycle, Max Scherzer was traded to the Texas Rangers. Right. And at that point, it was hard to say whether the Mets were done with the big names or whether they were also now trying to trade Justin Verlander. Fast forward to today, they have traded Justin Verlander to the Houston Astros and completed the sell-off of the big Hall of Fame level pitchers that they spent $43.33333 million per year on.
Right.
And they are paying down most of all of that money to the other teams so that they can get back the maximum prospect return, which, as depressing as it is, the prospect return is actually quite good.
Yes. Okay. So this has been the topic of conversation in the lead up to the trade deadline for weeks. It's like the Mets. They're very disappointing this year. They spent all that money. What will they do? Will they double down? Will they throw sort of bad money after good in an effort to make this season less of a disaster? And then a few weeks ago at the end of June, Steve Cohen spoke to the media, and I'm not like, he didn't spell this out for us. That would be bad negotiating if he told everyone what he was intending to do. But I actually thought that what they ended up doing tracked pretty closely to what he expressed as like priorities and considerations and sort of how he saw his ownership of the team unfolding. And dating back to kind of everything that Steve Cohen has said in the last couple of years, this whole like, we want to be the Dodgers East, but setting aside sort of the buzziness of that, he's been really clear about the fact that like they don't want to touch their prospect capital, that they view Steve Cohen's essentially unlimited money as a way to try to contend quickly and also, build up the farm system and do both of those things without moving any of the talent you already have on your roster. They want to only bring talent in. And then there's two currencies in baseball. There's prospect capital and literal capital money. And they were like, we're going to spend all of column B and not touch any of column A. And when Steve Cohen talked to the media at the end of June, I was sort of thinking like, this guy seems legitimately committed to staying that overarching course, regardless of what it means for this particular season. And not to be like too much of like I don't know. I hate when I sound like Uncle Steve fanboy, like, reply guy on Twitter about like, wow, this Steve Cohen guy, he's so smart. But like, he is legitimately quite smart. And it is notable when he speaks because he's also doesn't really have to give a so he doesn't like obscure all of what he means because he's got you money. And so like when he talks, he lays out what he's thinking pretty clearly, all of which is to say it wasn't that mysterious what they were going to do because they did not want to, what it means to buy at the deadline is to spend your prospects to bolster a team that you already spent a lot of money on. And if they didn't want to do that, kind of had to sell. And they did in fact manage to not just turn money into a team that they thought could contend and a team that like very much did contend last year and won 101 games. It was really exciting, but they also managed to turn money into prospects, which is kind of hard to do. So congrats to them. They figured out a way to only pull from one resource and use that to attempt to do two separate goals. And in the absence of doing that, at least accomplish one of their goals, which is to bolster the farm system.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of the Mets spent a lot of money on one resource that was non-renewable, 38 to 40-year-old starting pitchers. And then when it went boom and didn't work, they like quickly engineered a way to turn the raging fire of the explosion into a renewable resource, which is lots of pretty good prospects. And that took money. They only got, we can list out some of the prominent prospects. We're not going to get into the entire reasoning behind this, but Luis Angel Acuna, Ronald Acuna's younger brother, is coming over to the Mets in the Max Scherzer deal. They got Drew Gilbert from the Astros as the headliner in the Justin Verlander trade, along with Ryan Clifford. They're both well-regarded young hitters. And they only got these guys because they were willing to pay down the salaries that they originally committed to Verlander and Scherzer. And that's basically taking money they were planning to spend on one thing and using it to acquire the thing that they now feel is more useful. And overall, it's a very disappointing outcome for the 2023 Mets. Can't really get around that. It's probably going to be a less exciting outcome for the 2024 Mets than what many people had hoped, given that Verlander was signed for sure for 24 and Scherzer had an option that he was likely to remain with the Mets if he had stayed. So all of that being said, this was about as good a job repositioning a team as you could have done given the circumstances. And I think, although Cohen's kind of winter swashbuckling largesse was really fun for the sport, and I really wish it worked, it doesn't really work. Like, no one's building a team like that for a reason. It's because it's not really a way to go based on all the information we have. So changing it around so that they have a much better prospect base is unfortunately probably going to get them to his hoped for World Series faster, or at least get them a better shot faster than trying to pay every Hall of Fame pitcher who comes into free agency would.
Right. Not to you've got to hand it to them, but people were kind of widely mocking Billy Epler's comments, I think immediately after the Max Scherzer trade, or shortly after the Max Scherzer trade, in which it was lots and lots of business speak and buzzwords. And he said something about how this isn't a fire sale or a whatever. It's a reallocation of Steve's resources or something. And it is that. I was like, that's not just fluff. That's literally what it is. They are not getting nothing for the money that they spent. They are getting prospects, and prospects have a lot more volatility maybe than multi-Cy Young award winning pitchers. But since that didn't pan out, well, prospects it is. Okay, should we talk about the Scherzer versus Epler? When are the Mets going to contend?
Sure. I think we so the background here is Max Scherzer, now with the Texas Rangers, gave interviews today in which he said that Billy Epler, while discussing the team's future, told him that they would not be competing in 2024, that they weren't reloading, that they were looking more toward 2025 and 2026. And he also, Scherzer made some reference to, the guys who are only signed through 2024 might get traded, which was a big flare on Twitter because Pete Alonso is only signed through 2024. Spoiler alert, Pete Alonso was not traded. So, there's a little bit of just what Billy Epler told Max Scherzer, clearly for good reason, made Max Scherzer say, all right, well, I'm approaching 39 years old. If the Mets are not trying to win in 2024, I should accept a trade out. And I think both guys have, I don't think Billy Epler was lying to Max Scherzer or anything. I think there's probably definitions of trying that we have to parse a little bit there.
Yes. We were texting about this a little bit, and I made the point that is regardless of what that conversation held, which look, they can't guarantee Max Scherzer they're going to contend next year. And Billy Epler also said separately, I think our playoff odds will be lower going into 2024 than they were going into 2023, which also seemed to indicate perhaps a longer step back, rebuild, whatever, retooling, reallocation of Steve's resources than the Mets fans wanted to hear. I think that there is a way for both that to be true. And then later, if they participate in free agency, that doesn't render this necessarily a lie. They did not, in fact, end up trading Pete Alonso or anybody else who's only signed through next year. And so they will have those players and probably try to maximize having those players in some way. What I texted you was, does this hurt their chances in the forthcoming Ohtani free agency sweepstakes? And you expressed skepticism that they had much chance to speak of because he seems like he wants to stay on the West Coast. And I didn't respond to that because I was focusing on the trade deadline and so were you. But I do think yes, however, that also would be news and disappointing news to a lot of teams. So we shouldn't take it for granted that if Ohtani ends up expressing a desire to only negotiate with teams on the West Coast, that would be a big deal. So anyway, that's just to say that. Wait, 2 more things about that. One, in retelling this conversation, the one that he had with Billy Epler, when Max explained the conversation he had with Billy Epler to Ken Rosenthal, who published the first sort of version of this, he said something about how Billy said they're not going to contend next year. And I said, I got to hear it from Steve. And I was like, wow, rude to Billy Epler. Just a completely unnecessary random dig in which he was like, the GM told me something. And I thought, all right, sure. Let's see what the owner says. It was and then the owner said, yeah, that's true.
I mean, you got to hand it to Max. He heard the news that Steve Cohen has paraded in front of multiple microphones and been like, I am hiring someone over top of Billy Epler as soon as I possibly can.
Max Scherzer's like, I'm not dealing with this Billy Epler dude. I want give me someone higher up on the chain to talk to. One more quote that I'm going to read to you before we move on. Pete Alonso said, this is from Tim Britton of The Athletic. Pete Alonso said that he doesn't worry too much about the organizational philosophy. Said a few times it doesn't matter to him. Quote, I don't know what the future holds, he said, adding he'll give his all for however long he's here. Says he hasn't talked to the front office lately. And you know what? I want my antidepressants to work so well that I am as unbothered as Pete Alonso is about everything naturally. That man is just out here vibing, just in his head is just whatever soundtrack he selected for his first home run derby win. He just doesn't care when they're contending, what they're planning, if they're trading him. That was before we found out that they weren't trading him. And he was like, I have no idea what's going on and I don't care to know. So
I would just like to say that, the current generation of young Mets, they're calling the baby Mets. I hope when Acuna and Gilbert and Marco Vargas from the David Robertson deal come up, that they call them the reallocations of Steve's resources or something to that effect. Yes.
The Mets also traded other people. They traded Tommy Pham. They traded Mark Canha. Sad for him, who is leaving the New York food scene to go to the Milwaukee food scene. And I think that's it.
Rough times.
Did they trade anybody else? See, already.
I believe they traded Dominic Leone to the Angels.
Okay. Well, whatever. So, as previously mentioned, Max Scherzer went to the Rangers, and they did not stop there. Actually, they didn't start there or stop there.
No. The Rangers acquired Aroldis Chapman a while ago to fit your do things early if you want to get the maximum impact. Then, closer to the deadline, they got Max Scherzer, and they got Jordan Montgomery, aforementioned pitcher from the Cardinals, which is pretty much as soon as they did those things, they put Nathan Eovaldi on the IL. Yeah. And so that's why they did that. The Rangers are looking at their starting rotation, which they built pretty much entirely from external acquisitions over the past year and a half. And it's hurt again because pitchers get hurt. And they're trying to make sure that they have a rotation that they can cobble together to put with one of the league's best offenses that has had no issues, really didn't need that many additions. They brought in Austin Hedges as a backup catcher because Jonah Heim is on the IL also. But overall, offense really good, pitching staff very hurt. And so the Rangers said, we would like Max Scherzer and Jordan Montgomery to slot in there. And, in terms of impact, the Rangers probably got some of the most impact overall of the deadline.
Definitely. Both in terms of individual players and overall by doubling down. I mean, they were very well positioned to participate in this only pitchers trade deadline because, like you said, their offense is just fine. I think that everything we have written both of us at any point this year about the Texas Rangers has featured some version of like, the Texas Rangers are doing this you can never have too much pitching thing. We wrote that in the offseason. In spring training,
we wrote that
then we
like
did
a month ago.
A feature about it, a combined feature about it, and then that was also their deadline. They have a GM who is a former pitcher in Chris Young, and he would like to talk to all of the very good pitchers in baseball at some point while they are professionally obligated to take his calls.
Yes. While he is their employer.
Yes. So that's what they're doing, which is very cool because currently they are half a game up in the AL West, ahead of the big bad championship reigning Houston Astros, who were the beneficiaries of the Justin Verlander unloading. And Jim Crane also gave a very rude comment about Billy Epler. Again, just taking L's all over the place.
Billy Epler catching strays.
Jim Crane gave a comment to the Associated Press that was like, well, he's a very good pitcher, and they were willing to pay his salary. So it was a pretty easy decision. Just being like, we did not even negotiate that hard with them. We're just like, we will take your Justin Verlander. And Justin Verlander, like Max Scherzer, had a full no trade clause. And I think only was interested in returning to Houston, which was not great for the Mets negotiating position. I like this deal because I am bad at learning where players are when they are in new places. And Justin Verlander back on the Astros just makes sense for them as well, because they also are dealing with a lot of pitcher injuries. They're very similar actually to the Rangers in the sense that like they had a lot of really good pitching. Some of their starters have gotten hurt and some of them are out for the year. Their pitching has still been pretty good. And so sort of when you look at their like roster resource page, you're like, oh, okay, no, I think they're like third in baseball in starting pitcher ERA. And so it doesn't seem like they need starters, but they feel like they need starters because they are aware that like the ranks are getting rather thin and they are relying on a lot of either rookies or guys who are starting to falter a little bit. Framber Valdez hasn't been as good of late as he was every time before of late, I guess. He's been really good and then not so good.
And the Astros, we have to remember, their like bar for a normal season is reaching the ALCS.
Yes.
So, they got to eclipse that to have a fun year. So they got to add to it. I mean, they have just sprouted new good pitchers like JP France, who is a 28-year-old rookie and has been terrific. Hunter Brown's a very good rookie who was a top prospect, so that one's not very surprising. But Verlander slotting back in just makes the Astros... I feel bad for the Rangers, honestly, because they've been such a good story, and the Astros looked like, asleep at the wheel for the first 2 months, and it's like, nope, JK, they're coming. They're going to win.
Yes, well, Altuve is back, Alvarez is back, and Justin Verlander is back. A lot of just, this worked last year for the Houston Astros. And not only last year, many years before that. It's going to be so weird. I wrote this in my little like Justin Verlander blurb. Someday, Justin Verlander will go into the Hall of Fame and we'll be like, what? He was on the Mets for a couple of months? Because it'll be it's very strange that his career will go like, yes, he was on the Detroit Tigers and then he went to the Houston Astros in a very interesting waiver deadline trade in 2017, the year that the Astros became the Astros in more ways than one. And then he was like on the Astros forever. He won 2 Cy Youngs, 2 rings at counting. He's 40. So, and this deal has another year and then a vesting option for a third year. So probably his last one. And yeah, he will have spent the entirety of his career on 2 teams plus 4 months.
Couple months with the Mets.
4 months with the Mets.
Yeah. Did you want to mention the very funny way that Martin Maldonado responded to Justin Verlander coming back?
Please tell the people the tweets that we enjoyed sending each other.
So Martin Maldonado, catcher on the Astros. He's really just like a catcher extraordinaire. He can't really do anything else on a baseball field, but the Astros keep him around because he's apparently just actual magic when catching. So he apparently was texting back and forth with Justin Verlander, hearing of the trade rumors, and Verlander texted him, "Let's effing go," to say he's coming back. And Martin Maldonado just responded with a gif of Justin Verlander doing the very awkward fielding flop that he did in the World Series a couple of years ago. And that was the response, which is excellent. Martin Maldonado, guy who will be very well remembered, but not an inner circle Hall of Famer, just absolutely leveling Justin Verlander over text.
It's the status that Martin Maldonado has, not just like in that clubhouse in kind of like a he's a cool clubhouse guy way, but within that organization, which is, as we discussed, quite ambitious, quite successful, quite analytically minded. And Justin Verlander, also quite ambitious, quite successful, quite venerated within the game. And also, I'm going to go out on a limb and say someone who doesn't seem like that has a big sense of humor about himself. How does Martin Maldonado get to both continue to be on the best team as a guy who's not good at the plate and also isn't good at the measurable parts of catching, to be clear? It's not like he's like a framing master. And also gets to poke fun at Justin Verlander. I said something stupid to Justin Verlander in spring training, and I've thought about it all the time since, because I was like, oh gosh. So a bolder person than I, that Martin Maldonado. All right. That's the AL West. We're going to take a quick break and come back with even more reactions from this trade deadline, because there are other divisions to discuss. Were those all AL West teams? They were.
Well, the Mets weren't, but
the Mets were. All the teams that got better in that segment. All right. Now, another division that exists is the NL West. Not as exciting as the AL West, because all of the impactful players went to the AL West, but they made moves. These teams, it's a good race. The Padres didn't sell, which was cool. How do you want to get into this? This is like a lot of little moves.
Let's start from the bottom, which is right now the Padres, weirdly. I mean, it's the Rockies, but they didn't do anything. So,
oh my gosh.
Not
I forgot about them. There was all these tweets about how the Yankees were the only team that didn't do anything. That implies the Rockies did something. Oh, they did. They were the CJ Cron. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, the Padres should be good by pretty much any way you want to look at it. The Padres should be good. They have the best team ERA going into today, I believe, and they're just not. They're not good. They're 3 games under 500. And instead of selling parts like Blake Snell and Josh Hader, who are both in the last year of their contracts, they are so all in on 2023 and 2024 that they said, okay, the bottom half of our lineup is a black hole. We could use a little more pitching help. So they did kind of the least AJ Preller thing imaginable. Yeah. And they just went and got the additions on the margins. They added Rich Hill. They added G-Man Choi. I think my personal favorite addition was Garrett Cooper from the Marlins. I have no idea what the Marlins are doing. We'll talk about them later. But they, for some reason, traded Garrett Cooper, who's a perfectly fine first baseman DH type, to the Padres for a pitcher that they super don't need.
Went out and got first baseman DH types.
I don't even know. We'll talk about them later. But the Padres really filled in some gaps. Their bench has been like a substance unknown to man. It's so useless. And they are adding guys who can be major league hitters to cycle through the bottom of that lineup and try to keep the line moving a little bit more than it has. So we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but that's what the Padres did. And then above them, the Giants did really nothing. They took 2 extra guys from the Seattle Mariners to help the Seattle Mariners trade some other dudes. The Giants have a lot of top prospects they've called up. Marco Luciano came up this past week and looks pretty good. So really, the Giants are doing the prospects are coming up trade deadline. Fine. The Arizona Diamondbacks added Paul Sewald, closer from the Mariners, which filled one of their biggest needs was bullpen help. They also added Tommy Pham from the New York Mets. And then the Los Angeles Dodgers tried to get pitching, and that's about the most you can say.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to the Padres really quick, because I think for the entire first half and a little bit more, we baseball media, we're talking about the Padres almost always in the same sentence as the Mets. How could these two teams do so much and be so bad? And so I thought it was really interesting that, like, I don't know when, few weeks ago, their playoff odds, according to Fangraphs, have started to seriously diverge. And I don't totally know why. Their records aren't that different. Admittedly, the Padres seem better, like their individual performances are better. And so I guess when you kind of consider what each of those individual performances will look like as a congregate over the course of the remainder of the season, plus schedule difficulty, whatever else, it works out to better playoff odds. But like a couple days ago, let's just say like the last day of July, so two days ago, the Mets playoff odds down around like 11%, I think. And the Padres at like 34%. So significantly more than the Yankees, for instance, who have a better record, more than the Angels, who are definitely think that they have a chance to make the playoffs. And so that is all to say that, like, the Padres were not just, I don't know, the Padres were not doing the thing that the Mets didn't do. That sounds like a lot of negatives. But my point is, like, everybody was like, with the Mets, they should really trade, but are they going to not trade because, like, sell because they have already been invested so much in this season? How could they ever? And they didn't. They bit the bullet, did the difficult thing, unloaded the talent, waved the white flag on this season. And the Padres didn't have quite as much an imperative to do that. That is all. My point is just,
yes,
the Padres could very reasonably be playing in the playoffs, and then when they are there, they could very reasonably make a deep run. They have maybe the best pitcher right now going in Blake Snell, and it will not be like, who could have possibly seen this coming? They've been good. Their individual players have been good. They have been significantly less than the sum of their parts, but there are glimmers of hope.
Can I make a very brief baseball media complaint in the middle of this? So today, in the middle of the baseball trade deadline, MLB changed a scoring decision from 2.5 weeks ago. And the result, which no one would care about otherwise, the result was that Blake Snell, who I have been referring to all week as MLB ERA leader, was no longer the MLB ERA leader.
What?
Because Cubs pitcher Justin Steele got a run taken off of his record and became the MLB ERA leader based on that scoring change.
How did you notice this?
I have a lot of columns on TweetDeck, but that happened in the middle of this. So anyway, he's the second best pitcher going at the moment, apparently. But whatever. The Padres, yes, they have a reason to try and make it work this year.
And I think they might. However, that division, quite crowded. Not as... I wonder if the Dodgers... Like, why are they so good? Sorry, that was not a well-phrased question. I am just like, they didn't have a good offseason. Then Gavin Lux got hurt. They had an uninspired trade deadline. Eduardo Rodriguez does not want to pitch for them. And yet, they are still good.
Yeah, let's talk about the Dodgers. So the Dodgers are typically this like perfectly balanced machine of all of the things working well. They are not this year. They still have Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Will Smith, Clayton Kershaw, Julio Urias. They're still pretty good. You know, all the other teams in the league would do heinous things to have these players. But
rude.
The Dodgers do not have a deep pitching staff, and the pitching has been a real problem. They are actually in the bottom 10 in team ERA. They're kind of slugging their way through that issue, but they have a lot of young pitchers who are taking their lumps, and I'm sure some of these guys, Emmett Sheehan, Bobby Miller, those guys will be good eventually, probably, but they're not good right now. And for the Dodgers, that's kind of an issue because they are pitching right now. So the Dodgers got Lance Lynn, who's also not good right now, in a trade with the Chicago White Sox, and are hoping to kind of, zhuzh him up and make him good again. But then they tried for another starter today at the deadline, and it came out, Jeff Passan reported this, that Eduardo Rodriguez, the star pitcher for the Detroit Tigers, who literally everyone on earth thought was being traded. They worked out a deal for him, and he used his 10-team no-trade clause to say no. And unlike pretty much every other time a no-trade clause gets invoked, this one was not worked out. It just blew up, and the Dodgers got no significant pitching, and Eduardo Rodriguez stayed on the Tigers. First of all, I'll say this was a bigger fail for the Tigers than for the Dodgers, but the Tigers don't really matter, so we're going to talk about the Dodgers. And the Dodgers, I mean, they really need Lance Lynn to be good now, or they need to like renovate some of the young guys to help them get there. What did you make of this Dodgers deadline?
I'm mostly what I made of it is that like we didn't even talk about they gave away Noah Syndergaard. I was going to say they traded him. They gave him away, basically.
They got Ahmed Rosario, who's like the Guardians equivalent of Noah Syndergaard.
Yes. Okay. They traded Noah Syndergaard to the Guardians, like a 1-for-1 Noah Syndergaard for Ahmed Rosario trade. And then they also got Kike Hernandez back from the Red Sox. That's where he was, right? And those are both players who you know their names, but they're not having good years. They're having way worse years than you even realize they're having if you haven't looked at their stats lately. And then to add insult to injury, everybody was like, why would the Guardians even want Noah Syndergaard? Like, setting aside what are the Dodgers doing going out acquiring bad position players, why would the Guardians want Noah Syndergaard? And then Noah Syndergaard was good for the Guardians in his first start. And I get that the Guardians are very good at pitching development, but so are the Dodgers. And
I dispute that he was good. He was
weird.
He was somehow effective.
Weird.
But he struck out no one. And walked 2.
But also gave up no runs, I think?
Yeah. So, you know, I wouldn't count on it continuing, but it was one better start than he ever gave the Dodgers, that's for sure.
It was like, yes, that's what I'm saying. It's more that it was like truly like a insult to injury type situation. Oh, he did end up giving up an earned run at some point in that game. I didn't see that happened. But like, he made 12 starts for the Dodgers this year and never gave up no runs. Well, once he did, but he only pitched an inning. And he had an ERA of 7.16 when he went to the Guardians. And then he had a, on its face, decent looking little 5 1/3 innings, 1 earned run for the Guardians. This is like the least, now we have spent too long on the least interesting part of the trade deadline. But that is my thought about the Dodgers trade deadline, is just like the Dodgers have lost a little bit of their mojo this year.
What is your percentage right now? The Dodgers are up 2.5 games, I believe, in the NL West. They win the NL West pretty much every year unless the Giants have a historic 107 win season. What is the percentage chance you think right now that the Dodgers keep going and win the division?
Like, what do I think, or what do I think the odds think?
No. I'm not asking. Yeah, what do you actually think?
I think they don't win the division, but that's because I said that before. Like, I predicted at some point, we made predictions. Maybe it was like first half recap. And I said, like, of all the teams in the postseason picture, I think I predicted the Dodgers to fall out of the postseason picture. And that was maybe overstating it a little bit. But I think there are enough teams in their division that are trying, that have reason to be good, reason to be better than they have. And the Dodgers feel like they are, it's a little bit a case of, do you think organizational success is a better indication of future performance, or like collection of talent? And now that I've said that out loud, it feels like organizational success is generally the better indicator. Like the Dodgers, the Dodgers record is better than their players. They are greater than the sum of their parts, and the Padres are worse than the sum of their parts. So which way will regression take them over the final 2 months? Stay tuned.
I'm really going to undermine the entire frenzy of read all our trade deadline writing and listen to our trade deadline podcast. I think if you zoom out from like today, I think the Dodgers are like 85% chance to win the division. Not saying they'll go the furthest in the postseason.
Oh,
I would not love to face the Padres in the postseason if they make it there. I'd be fine facing the Giants. I don't understand who pitches for them. But, I think the Dodgers are just an unbelievable regular season power. And I think the worst pitching is probably behind them, mostly because they got rid of Noah Syndergaard. And I think they will hold on to the division.
But to be clear, they got Lance Lynn, who is perhaps the worst pitching.
He has not been good. He's given up homers pretty much anytime you want. But I think they will help him in some way. Maybe.
They're like, let us help you to help us, quite literally. Okay, we have to talk about the teams that did nothing. But before we do that, I feel like there's only we don't need to talk teams that sold. You can figure them out. They were the Mets. They were the Cardinals.
The White Sox.
The White Sox. Yes, the White Sox. The only team that interestingly bought or acquired major league talent that we haven't talked about yet really is like the Marlins. We alluded to this.
The Cubs. I would say the Cubs pivoted and got Jeimer Candelario to play. I think he's mostly going to play first base for them, which will be a big upgrade. But that was an interesting decision. I would say that's a less justifiable version of the same Padres ethos of whatever, we might make it. So, I don't think I would have done what the Cubs did, but I applaud the effort to make it interesting this year.
I did have the thought that I'm all teams should act early, quickly, jump on the deadline, get a head start, blah, blah, blah. And that had someone done that had a team that needed hitting gone out and aggressively pursued Cody Bellinger before the Cubs went on their win streak, that would have just completely sliding doors momented their season. And yet they held, and I don't know, maybe somebody did make them an offer and they were like, we're going to wait, we're going to see, maybe we'll get a better offer. And then instead what they did was go on a win streak and they were like, hell yeah, we're going for it. So that's the Cubs. Okay. The Marlins acquired Jake Berger from the White Sox, Josh Bell from the Guardians. Sad for him. He likes being in Cleveland because that's where his wife's family is. And now they're both in Miami, a team that had no power. They had Luis Ariz standing on first base all the time and then just walking back to the dugout when the inning ended.
I will say the Marlins also added David Robertson a little bit before today. They got David Robertson from the Mets. And
a trade that I forgot.
They also added some attempts at hitting today, so here's what they did. They took Garrett Cooper, who plays first base and DH, and they traded him out. And then they brought in Josh Bell, who plays first base and DH. They have, by the way, identical OPS pluses. They are both exactly 96. I don't know what the difference was. Josh Bell, I guess, has a more proven track record, but not that much more proven. So they did that. They took Gene Segura, shipped him to Cleveland, and Cleveland immediately just cut Gene Segura. And then they're going to play Jake Berger, who shouldn't play many positions. They're going to play him at third. So they did all the shuffling, and they still have a bad defense and a meh offense.
Do you know that right now, this is very interesting to me, and it's going to be quickly rendered irrelevant because I'm going to talk about the standings and there are games being played. But right now, there are 3 teams tied for the last NL wildcard spot.
Oh, yeah. It's a total mess.
It's a mess. I understand why teams are confused about whether or not they should go for it. Or I understand why the Marlins were like, I guess we should go for it. We are currently tied for a postseason spot, but not too hard go for it because
This is not going for it. This is just subbing in different dudes who do the same thing the other dudes do. I mean, this is not going for it. This is moves for the sake of moves.
Yeah. David Robertson is a very good closer. He should have gone to a better team.
I'm sure he would have given
sure
the choice.
He would have. Yes, he doesn't have that choice. But I'm like, someone is going to be in the postseason. We could really use a little bit of bullpen help. All right. The Yankees did nothing effectively. They did a little thing, but basically they did nothing.
Yeah, they looked at their absolutely terrible offense that couldn't do anything without Aaron Judge and said, we're going to acquire a middle reliever.
Yeah, and a good middle reliever. They also benefited from the White Sox fire sale. But first of all, their bullpen is their only strength right now. They're a pretty good bullpen. And yeah, they are a team that is, there's a lot of back and forth when you talk about them. You're like, they're in last, but they're actually above 500. But when you watch them play, you're like, wow, this is the worst team I've ever seen. But they do have good players. And Garrett Cole was like the starting pitcher for the AL All-Star team, and Aaron Judge is Aaron Judge. Like, it is a very, like, if you are a Yankees fan, you think this is like the worst team that's ever been built because they just feel bad when you are watching them. But they are not as bad as they feel, but they are not so good that they should have done nothing at the deadline.
The Yankees, yeah. They look worse right now than they are, like almost by default. And it could get better. They could rally back up and get into the wild card picture. They didn't do any less than the Red Sox did, so there's that.
I guess, but to me though, they have more of an imperative to do something. I don't even know what that something is, but they have more of an imperative to do something because, as you have written about so eloquently, they're like a terrible roster construction right now, and they should not be sitting out opportunities to change something about the construction of their team. Like, we talked about this ahead of the deadline. We were like, what are the Red Sox going to do? And you were like, the Red Sox are going to do nothing because that's Heimblum's plan. And correct. Good job. But the Red Sox are doing this, whatever they're doing right now, they're doing it on purpose, and they think that they have a bigger plan. Like, the Yankees just are a mess, and they are just going to see how long that they cannot look like a mess in the standings while being a mess sort of under the hood. I was there last night, Monday night, when they lost to the Rays 5-1 in a series of very weird events that involved them scratching Domingo Germán, the intended starter, right before the game.
With
and then,
armpit discomfort.
And then bringing him into the game later. So that was all weird. But really, like, genuinely notable. This is like my dispatch from the front lines of the trade deadline. After the game, they lost. It was the last game before the deadline. We all went down, the New York media, listened to Aaron Boone try to be like, I don't know. Aaron Judge was hurt for a while. And that's true, I guess. And then we all walked into the clubhouse, and I'm trying to figure out how strongly I want to imply who I thought this was. We all walked into the clubhouse in one door, and Aaron Boone walked into the clubhouse in a different door and was behind a wall that we could not see. And then someone very loudly just shouted the F word. And it was, that doesn't sound like that doesn't sound as dramatic as it actually felt, weirdly. It really felt like I was like, oh, they are mad. Like, this is, and that sort of speaks to the, like, their record isn't terrible, but then when you spend time with them, you're like, oh, things are dicey. They are unhappy with how they are playing.
It did not, the front office's approach to this did not help. The Yankees were basically, so the Yankees trade for Keenan Middleton, the middle reliever they got from the White Sox, broke at 5:57 p.m. Eastern, right, 3 minutes before the deadline. And up until that moment, they were the only team in baseball that had not made a trade this month. And Aaron Boone, if you know how media availabilities work, he had to talk to the media before this trade broke today, while everyone else was doing things, adding players, yada, yada, yada. Boone was just asked what he thought was going to happen. And here's the quote, which pretty much is the definition of I don't know. But he said, you could see everything from nothing to guys leaving to guys coming. That was that was what he said, which, as it turns out, mostly nothing. Mostly nothing. And
he's like, the trade deadline, that's when sometimes you get players, and sometimes you give up players.
You lose them.
And sometimes nothing happens.
And
yes.
The press conferences are not going to get easier for Aaron Boone this year, I don't think.
Truly, though. But, like, we could spend a long time talking about the Yankees because they have an outsized media presence. But it really, right. I don't know what was I don't know whether or not it's like, well, what did you want them to do? I could not think of any particularly good moves for the Yankees to make, but I am not Brian Cashman. It feels like a dereliction of duty in some ways to just have not figured out something just so that way you did not leave the people on the ground in the position of having to be I don't know, we're no better. So I guess we have to try to be good, but we're also, you know what I mean? It's a very strange position to leave the clubhouse and the manager and the play, blah, 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 all of that in where you're they're in last. Are they going for it? What's happening? I talked to a bunch of guys this past week because I'm going to write something about this, about what trades do to the vibe in the clubhouse. When you get a guy versus when you give up a guy, when you're a team that's not sure what you are going to do at the deadline, how does it change the way you feel about the team, depending on which direction it goes. And it's what you think, but guys, we're pretty adamant that yeah, it feels effing amazing to get a player at the deadline. And it feels horrible to think you're going to get players at the deadline and then you ship players out. And I don't know how it feels to do nothing because I didn't think to ask them that, but probably not great, probably confusing. That's weird. That's weird, Yankees. All right. That's our whole podcast, except for now we're going to do Bandwagon. And it's going to be more trade deadline talk because I'm just going to say, Zach, who are you bandwagoning their deadline moves?
Yeah, we can be very quick because we've already explained these pretty much. But we were trying to figure out just who had our favorite deadline. And I thought about being a real provocateur and saying the Mets, but I'm going to go with the team that's actually trying to win for right now. And I think I'm taking the Padres. I think the Padres did a really nice job. I don't know if it'll result in a playoff berth, but I think given the constraints of what they were working with, they did a really nice job patching the pretty apparent problems with this year's team without taking anything away from the 2024 team. And that was really the impetus for them, was don't blow up a better chance at this, but try to make this year's better.
Okay, I like that because I've weirdly talked myself into thinking that the Padres are going to make a late push for the division. I was going to say, because apparently we're saying what we were going to say, but that didn't. I was going to say the Astros just because big picture, really impressive that they wanted to bring back Justin Verlander after they won a World Series with him, and he won a Cy Young with them last year, and he has a close personal relationship with Astros owner Jim Crane. They wanted to bring him back, and they were open and explicit. I believe they told the Houston Chronicle, they being Jim Crane, I should just say him, Jim Crane told the Houston Chronicle, we wanted to bring him back, but the Mets offered him more money than we were willing to offer him. Essentially, he actually didn't say it quite so literally, but that's what happened. So the Astros, kudos to them. They had, they didn't do a lot, but they got their guy for no money, basically. The Mets are paying him. The Mets are going to pay Justin Verlander more than the Astros were willing to pay Justin Verlander for him to pitch for the Astros. That's pretty good team building, I guess, by Jim Crane, to be honest, not the general manager. So, I mean, they really just, they couldn't have planned it that way. That was the Mets fuck up really benefiting them, but good job, Astros. I am bandwagoning the Angels because I am actually bandwagoning the Angels. I was whose deadline inspired the most rootability in me? It was far and away the Angels. This is, I've now written about it. You've written about it. This is cool. This is a team doing an illogical thing for an understandable reason. They have different circumstances than every other team almost in the history of baseball. And that is forcing them to make a run for it at a time when the numbers would probably say, don't do that. Really, definitely say, don't do that. And that's cool. And Perry Manassian is, I think, actually a pretty good GM. He's had a couple of years to build some depth, to build some baseball team around Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, and he's generally done that. And then injuries came for them, and that's a bummer. And now Ohtani's having a really cool year, and I'm just rooting for them. Like, I think it's definitely the story of the rest of the year is the Angels tried to do a thing that teams never do, but everybody's like, well, I do see why you would have to do that. So now I hope it works.
Yeah, when they make the movie about this Angels season, the movie will start like the first 5 minutes of the movie will be a montage about everything that's happened up until like now.
Right.
And now then the movie will start now. And whatever happens from here on out will be, most of the movie. They'll have to come up with a new name for it since Angels in the outfield was kind of taken, but
they'll be like,
we'll figure something out.
On the mound and also in the box. It's the Shohei Ohtani story.
Angels in all the places.
Angels in all the places. That's very cool. He does two things. Have you seen this? All right. That's all we've got for you this week. Make sure you're following both of us on X, as I guess we're calling Twitter. I think I said this last week. The worse Twitter becomes, the more I post on it, which is not good. I should start posting on the other social media. So you can follow me there on Threads and Blue Sky. And perhaps if enough people follow me, I will be inspired to take my not even tweets, whatever we're calling them, over there. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review. Tell a friend. We'll be back next week with a slightly better planned and less frazzled episode of the Bandwagon.